But it's time now for the big question in which we tackle a major news story of the day. Tonight, is Queen Elizabeth II the greatest Briton of all time? How does she match up to Robert Louis Stevenson, Winston Churchill, Jane Austen, J.K. Rowling, Florence Nightingale, William Shakespeare? Well, to debate this, I'm delighted to welcome in the studio Thomas Mason Archer-Mills, creator of the new Jubilee Anthem and founder of the British Monarchists Society. I'll also be joined by Head of Royal Protection Di Davies and Jeremy Havardi, who is the author of The Greatest Briton, essays on Winston Churchill's life and political philosophy. And last but not least, the Daily Mail's Robert Hardman, author of the new biography, Queen of Our Times. Great to have all of these wonderful guests with us. Let me start with you, if I can, to have you on the show. Folks, let me just gather my information here whilst we get to it. Thomas. Now, Thomas, do you think the Queen is our greatest Brit?
Without doubt, of course she is. Her Majesty has been the steadrock of this nation. 70 years that we're celebrating, and it's so very important. But what makes Britain great is what Britain has given to the world. And what Britain has given has been 70 years of this woman's undoubted service, creating a commonwealth of 8 remnants of the British Empire into 54 nations, which is 2.6 billion people that still look to the United Kingdom. What is the United Kingdom doing? Nobody is a greater person to fly the British flag than, of course, Her Majesty the Queen.
She's been remarkably dignified, a great figurehead.
Yes.
But has she actually done anything? I mean, historically, kings and queens have waged wars. They've either accumulated wealth or spent it. Has the Queen been active enough? I mean, is she comparable to Winston Churchill, who famously defeated Hitler?
Well, of course. She is the original influencer, social influence. When we look in the 60s, we look when America was rife with racism. We look at apartheid, and here she is, our Queen, dancing with the presidents of Africa, breaking through the race barrier and tackling things that most people, I don't think, would have done if they were in her position at that age and time.
Yeah.
So where we are today is, in a sense, where the Queen has brought us.
Yeah, for sure. And therefore, do you think she does qualify as our greatest Briton?
Yes, in the modern age, 100%.
OK. And is it longevity, or is it what she actually did? I mean, is it just because she's been in the job such a long time?
Well, this is a job that is learned, it's passed down. And yes, it is that. But what it comes down to is what she has been able to do on her own. So, of course, there's handlers, there's guiders, there's all of that. But at the end of the day, it's Her Majesty who decides what she wants to do.
Well, let's bring in the rest of our contributors to this conversation. And Di Davies is former head of Royal Protection, a retired top cop. And Di, you've obviously worked with the Queen. You've served her as head of Royal Protection. Is she our greatest Brit?
Well, I think by any definition, she merits coming very close to that. In modern times, I would say, yes, she probably has. But, you know, her greatest virtue, which nobody has spoken about so far, is her immense courage. Her courage both as an individual worldwide. I can't recall in 70-odd years any individual getting so much praise from around the world, from presidents, from prime ministers. I don't know of anyone else. And I heard a woman in the crowd yesterday say, you know, presidents come and go. She's had 14 prime ministers. She's seen them all come and go. How many of us could actually name all of them? And all these presidents that have come and gone. So she deserves, I think, almost to be put on that accolade. I concur with others who said, you know, Prime Minister Churchill warrants it in his time. But if we reflect the 70 years, as I have and have done, her courage, as I keep saying, is the greatest virtue I have seen in any individual. And I know from experience how often others have tried to either attack her, to bring her down, both in Ireland, both in this country. You wouldn't believe how many threats, attacks have been stopped, have been put aside by the dedication of others. I took an oath as a very young constable to actually, take the allegiance to the Queen. I stand by that, and I think the vast majority in this country still hold her to that very high standard. She comes very, very close, in my opinion. Yes, you can debate it, but frankly, why should we debate this subject at this time? She stands head above everyone I know, men and women. I don't know any other world leader who's held in such a high esteem. So, yes, I've persuaded myself she probably does deserve the accolade.
Robert Hardman, you write for the Daily Mail. You're the author of the new biography of our monarch, Queen of Our Times. Where does she rank, in your view, in terms of greatest Briton?
Well, I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed this debate. Greatest living Briton, I'd have absolutely no doubt about giving her that accolade. I might add, she'd absolutely hate this title. She does not like getting competitive either with the ancestors or anyone else. And for that reason, I know she wouldn't want it. So I think just put her up there as a sort of, you put her alongside Churchill, whoever, in the greatest ever. Greatest living, I mean, there's no question. When I was writing my book, I actually interviewed many of our prime ministers, both British and others. I mean, don't forget, we've talked about 14 British prime ministers, which she's had. But she's had, I mean, if you add up all the realms and the prime ministers there, it runs into the hundreds. And she's also met and known 14 US presidents, which is staggering. I interviewed George W. Bush for my book, and he said he couldn't think of anyone else in history ever who has met and known 14 presidents. She started with Truman all the way up to Joe Biden. She didn't meet Lyndon Johnson, but she did meet Herbert Hoover in retirement. That's 14. That's nearly a third of the total. And talking to Professor Joseph Nye of Harvard, the man who invented soft power, we've been talking about soft power, this use of influence. And I mean, she is the ultimate influencer, but using influence and charm rather than force. Professor Nye, he said, well, Britain's got two outstanding diplomatic soft power assets, which are unique. One is the English language, Shakespeare, etc., and the other is the Queen. And you talk to other people around the world, I mean, they would think we'd gone absolutely stark staring bonkers if we even suggested getting rid of her. I mean, any of these presidents, I just mentioned US presidents, I mean, we could go on about presidents of lots of other countries. I mean, Barack Obama, for example, he found her absolutely amazing, to the point that when he was delivering a speech in 2015 and he was musing on the essence of great leadership, and he said that he singled out two what he called giants of leadership of his lifetime who'd been lucky enough to meet. One was Nelson Mandela and the other was the Queen. We are not just talking about some figurehead, some nice great-grandmother, some lovely person who's managed to sit on the throne for 70 years and isn't that nice. What we're doing with this Jubilee, we are reflecting on one of the greats. So I have absolutely no hesitation saying greatest living Britain. But like I said, she wouldn't like that. She certainly wouldn't want to get into any sort of competition with the likes of Winston Churchill. But I mean, today there is no one else on the world stage like her, and let's just celebrate.
Robert Hardman, when you were writing your new biography of the Queen, Queen of Our Times, was there anything you unearthed about the monarch that surprised you?
Yes, lots. People said, oh, you can't possibly find out anything new. You know, she's been written about so comprehensively. And I mean, for starters, she very kindly gave me access to her father's wartime diaries. Now, at the moment, we hear a lot of people drawing comparisons between Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine and Winston Churchill, quite rightly, and we're talking about Churchill tonight. But reading those diaries, and they're very candid, they're extraordinary, they've never been published. Reading this monarch who's facing the worst crisis this country has ever known, imminent invasion, imminent execution of himself, his family, everything. You read his diaries, it explains so much about her, because he is incredibly stoical, and he's this sort of Zelensky-like figure. I see in Zelensky lots of the characteristics of George VI. He doesn't promise mad stuff. He doesn't promise things he can't deliver. But what he says, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to stand with you. And his account of being dive-bombed in his own home, I mean, it's extraordinary. He has to go out and put on a brave face, but he writes in his diary, I shouldn't even be writing this down, but I can't concentrate. I can't even look out of I just look out of the window. But he gets on with it because he has to. And just remember, all through that war, here is his teenage daughter who adores him, who reveres him, who is learning from him This is what she is picking up. This is how she's been trained, if you like. She once talked about, she said, training is all. I hope I've been well trained. Well, she has. And when you read how her father went through, that explains, as I say, that tells us where the keep calm and carry on ethic comes from. But I mean, I learned lots of other things talking to people who've known her well much more recently. You know, you just talk to, as I said, I've talked to prime ministers, to presidents. One thing that comes through, which I think is fascinating, is she never panics. I've tried to find examples of panic. Occasionally in her reign, her critics would say, you touched on it earlier, maybe she was a bit slow to act. Well, you know, over 70 years, who hasn't occasionally been slow to act? But there were moments, perhaps, where she could have acted more speedily, but she's never panicked. She doesn't rush to judgment. She takes things carefully, and that we've all been the beneficiaries of that. As Di has said, she's incredibly brave. I mean, I do find it absolutely extraordinary that possibly one of the most shocking days of her life, that day when she woke up one morning to find a drunk, drug-addled nutter at the end of her bed threatening to kill himself with a broken ashtray. I mean, that would be enough to send some people into therapy for life. Michael Fagan, I'm talking about, in the summer of 1982. 4 hours later, she was on parade holding an investiture. No one had any idea what she'd just been through because she didn't want to let anybody down. That's the sort of, that's the essence of her approach to duty. And it's why, people occasionally say, oh, well, isn't it time for her to, step aside like other monarchs have done? And a lot of other monarchs have done. The Queen of Holland, the King of Belgium, the King of Spain, the Pope, the Emir of Qatar, even our last emperor stepped down a couple of years ago. She won't, because she took an oath before God and she made that famous vow on her 21st birthday. She was going to serve us all her life. And boy, is she stuck to that oath.
Too right. Jeremy Harvardy, you're the author of The Greatest Briton, Essays on Winston Churchill's Life and Political Philosophy, another fascinating read. Is the Queen's legacy comparable with that of Churchill?
Well, hi, Mark. I think the Queen has a fantastic legacy. I think she's been a magnificent leader who's served her nation with a great sense of duty and service. And she's been a role model. And everything that's been said so far, I think, is absolutely right. And I agree with Robert. I think she's the greatest living Briton. I wouldn't personally say that you can compare her legacy with that of Churchill, because I think that they are not people that are in that sense comparable. And if I can maybe just say why I think Churchill deserves the accolade. I think when you look at most politicians today, a lot of them come across as bland. They're sometimes opportunistic. Sometimes they're accused of not having a consistent political philosophy, and they can come into our lives and a decade later they're gone and that's it. Churchill was a remarkable political figure. He had a public career that lasted 6 decades. And during that time, he tackled pretty much every major issue in politics and the economy. So, for example, issues of taxation, House of Lords reform, prison reform, naval reform. He was Chancellor, he was Home Secretary. Then the international issues like the Arab-Israeli conflict in Northern Ireland, Russia's relations with the West. I mean, he had a gigantic knowledge and a great sweep of events. But of course, what he's primarily remembered for is that during the greatest crisis that these islands have known, he stepped up and he was the war leader that Britain needed. And he was a truly great war leader. In so many ways. For example, he rejected the idea of a compromise peace. Now, had he not become Prime Minister, Lord Halifax would surely have become Prime Minister and was open to the idea of a compromise peace with Germany. Hitler wouldn't have any of it for many reasons, and one of them was that there was a historian in him that was always looking to see what the verdict of history would be like if he took any course of action. And he knew that it would be disastrous. You couldn't have a hegemonic Germany in charge of the whole of Europe. He saw through Hitler. He realized he was not some kind of nationalist with grievances, but that he was a revolutionary who would ultimately destroy civilization. So Churchill was magnificent. His oratory was soaring. It galvanized his nation. It galvanized the subjugated peoples of Europe. And he had an unceasing energy in the way that he actually conducted the war. So during the greatest crisis that we've really known, Churchill's leadership was magnificent. And that's not to say, of course, that he didn't make mistakes. He did make mistakes. There were political misjudgments. He did have feet of clay. But I would argue that on the fundamental issues, the really important issues of the day, whether it was trying to prevent World War I, whether it was anticipating the danger in the 1930s from the fascist powers, and of course the leadership during the Second World War, and also I have to say anticipating the danger from Stalin after 1945. In all those respects, Churchill's judgment stands up. He was remarkably prescient, and also so much of what he says remains relevant to debates today.
Couldn't agree with you more. I look forward to delving deeply into your book, Jeremy. Di, we're established here. We have established that the Queen is a great Briton. I agree with Robert, our greatest living Briton. What about the Queen as a human being? Is she a great human being? You probably know her personally, the best of all five of us here.
Well, no, I must correct you on that. I don't. But what I would say is her humanity comes through in the 600 plus charities that she does support, has supported. I don't think we realise how much work goes on behind the scenes that this woman and indeed her family put into. Not only do they support charities and bring a huge amount of money in, their support, again, is instrumental in bringing others on board, along with her husband. We are so privileged to have this woman. Her Christianity, which shines through, as has been reflected today, actually steers, in my opinion, everything she does. And for that, I think we are so grateful. So I agree with all your panelists, the greatest living Briton, and we can discuss Churchill till the cows come home. But I agree, and I've been swayed with that by your very learned contributors tonight.
Thomas Mason Archer Mills, does the Queen still have a contribution to make?
The Queen is always making a contribution every day, 96 years old and still working full-time. That's the greatest contribution that she could ever make. And from day one, in front of God, in front of her people, an oath, whether it be her whole life, long or short, dedicated to the service of this nation and the great imperial family to which we all belong. That is duty. That is effort, which she has made effortless. So her contributions every day that she continues to be with us on the face of this earth is a contribution. She takes that very seriously. There will never be abdication. There will be nothing of the sort. Let's put that to bed right now, Mark. So every contribution that she wants to continue to make, she will do for as long as she is willing and able to do so.